The story begins not in the grand castles of Europe, but in the dust and danger of the Holy Land. The year was 1119. Only 2 decades after the First Crusade, Jerusalem had fallen into Christian hands, and streams of pilgrims from Europe flooded into the sacred city, believing they were walking in the footsteps of Christ himself. But the roads leading to Jerusalem were treacherous. Bandits, rival warlords, and remnants of Islamic armies lurked in the shadows. Pilgrimage was not only a journey of faith, it was a gamble with one's life. Into this dangerous world stepped a small band of knights, led by a French nobleman named Hugues de Payens. They were few in number, just 9, according to the earliest chronicles. 9 men, bound by oath, who pledged themselves not to riches, not to conquest, but to the protection of pilgrims. They called themselves the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. History would come to know them simply as the Knights Templar. At first glance, they were almost insignificant. 9 men could hardly protect thousands of pilgrims scattered across the roads of the Holy Land. But their commitment, their discipline, and their aura of mystery soon attracted attention. The King of Jerusalem, Baldwin II, granted them a base unlike any other, quarters upon the sacred Temple Mount itself, in the former Al-Aqsa Mosque, a structure believed by many Christians to be built upon the ruins of King Solomon's temple. And here the legend begins. Because what did those 9 knights do, living upon the very stones that were said to hide treasures of the Old Testament, secrets of Solomon, perhaps even relics carried from the ancient world? Chroniclers say they dug beneath the temple. Some dismiss this as later invention, but the whispers persist. Were they searching for something? The Ark of the Covenant, scrolls of forbidden wisdom, or perhaps a relic connected to Christ himself? Whatever they found, or didn't find, their fortunes changed dramatically. Within a decade, Hugues de Payens had secured the support of one of the most powerful voices in Christendom, Saint Bernard of Clairvaux. Bernard, a mystic and reformer, praised the Templars not only as warriors, but as holy men fighting with sword in one hand and prayer in the other. With his blessing, the Templar order exploded into power. Knighthood had always been a worldly pursuit, tied to wealth, lineage, and land. But the Templars were something new, warriors bound to poverty, chastity, and obedience, yet also armed to the teeth and feared on the battlefield. Their white mantles emblazoned with the Red Cross became a symbol of terror to their enemies and of divine protection to pilgrims. Soon, noble families across Europe began to send their sons into the order, not just younger sons with no inheritance, but heirs, cousins, and men of influence. And here we see the beginning of the bloodline connection, for when sons of noble houses entered the Templars, they brought with them not only military skill, but alliances, inheritances, and secrets of their lineage. Families intertwined with the Templars gained prestige, while the order itself grew wealthy beyond imagination. Kings donated land, barons gifted estates, and soon the Templars owned vast swaths of territory stretching from Portugal to Poland. They were not only knights, they became bankers, administrators, and stewards of wealth. Pilgrims entrusted their fortunes to them, creating what some call the first international banking system. But behind the white mantles and iron discipline, darker questions arose. Why did the Templars grow so quickly in wealth and influence? What exactly had they discovered in those early years beneath the Temple of Solomon? Was it mere legend? Or did they unearth something so powerful it forced even the Pope to shield them with his blessing? Because indeed, by 1139, Pope Innocent II granted the Templars privileges unlike any other order. They were exempt from paying taxes. They answered to no king, no bishop, only the Pope himself. They could travel across borders freely, immune from interference. In effect, they were above the law of nations. This is where the whispers begin to twist into conspiracy. Some claimed they held knowledge passed down from Solomon. Others whispered they were keepers of the Holy Grail, and still others pointed to their uncanny success and asked, were the Templars truly servants of Christ, or had they bound themselves to some hidden force, some secret tradition that predated Christianity itself? What cannot be denied is that by the mid-12th century, the Templars had become more than a monastic order. They had become an institution interwoven with the nobility of Europe, touching nearly every major royal house. In France, England, Spain, and beyond, families who gave their sons to the Templars gained protection, alliances, and access to wealth. The bloodlines of Europe were not only tied to thrones and crowns, they were now tied to the Red Cross of the Temple. But this was only the beginning, because every rise carries within it the seeds of its fall. And the more powerful the Templars became, the more dangerous their secrets grew. What were those secrets? Were they written in hidden manuscripts, smuggled back from Jerusalem? Were they locked away in fortified commanderies across Europe? Or were they carried in the veins of those who lived, knights and nobles alike, whose families would ensure the Templar legacy could never truly die? This is the shadowed beginning of the bloodline myth. And as we move deeper into the centuries, we will see how these whispered connections between noble families and the Templars gave rise to dynasties that some claim still hold power today. But before that legacy could spread, the Templars first had to rise to heights unimaginable. Their story is not one of simple piety. It is a saga of wealth, betrayal, and survival. And even in these early days, as 9 knights prayed on the Temple Mount, the seeds of destiny were already being sown. The Temple had been reborn, and with it, a legacy that no king, no pope, and no time could erase. By the middle of the 12th century, the Templars were no longer just a handful of knights praying in Jerusalem. They had become a force woven into the very fabric of Christendom. Their white mantles, marked with the Red Cross, were seen not just in the dusty deserts of the Holy Land, but in the green fields of France, the castles of England, and the hills of Spain. They had grown into something unprecedented, a religious, military order that answered to no king, no bishop, only the Pope himself. Yet, what made the Templars truly formidable was not only their swords, but their networks of wealth and influence. A pilgrim in London could deposit money at a Templar commandery and withdraw the same funds in Jerusalem. This system, an early form of banking, was revolutionary. Gold and silver no longer had to cross dangerous roads. Instead, promissory notes, secured by the authority of the Templar seal, moved invisibly across continents. But here is where the story turns strange, because this flow of wealth also created intimate bonds with the noble houses of Europe. A baron might entrust his lands to the Templars while he rode on crusade. A king might borrow heavily to fund his wars, and a family might send a younger son to join the order, gaining prestige and protection in return. Step by step, bloodlines that once owed loyalty only to crown and kin found themselves tied to the Temple. Consider France, where the order was strongest. Noble families from Champagne, Burgundy, and Aquitaine saw their sons don the Red Cross. These were not insignificant households. They were dynasties whose marriages and alliances shaped the politics of Europe. To be connected with the Templars was to be connected with power that transcended borders. In England, too, the Templars carved out an empire. Their headquarters, the Temple in London, was more than a fortress. It became a hub of law and finance, so influential that centuries later, England's legal profession would still bear the mark of the Temple in the Inns of Court. Kings themselves turned to the knights for money, advice, and at times protection. But perhaps most fascinating of all were the Templars' dealings in Spain and Portugal. The Reconquista, the centuries-long struggle to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula from Muslim rule, provided endless opportunities for the knights. In return for their service, monarchs showered them with land, castles, and privileges. Here, the Templars did more than protect pilgrims. They became lords, rulers in all but name. Families that aligned with them grew wealthy and powerful, their bloodlines bolstered by Templar alliances. And yet, behind this prosperity lingered mystery. The Templars were known for their secrecy. Their initiation rites were whispered about with fear and suspicion. New recruits swore oaths of loyalty in ceremonies hidden from the outside world. Some later accused them of denying Christ, spitting on the cross, or worshipping a strange idol called Baphomet. Were these accusations mere inventions of enemies, or the distorted echoes of deeper truths known only to the inner circle of the order? What is undeniable is that the Templars cultivated an aura of forbidden knowledge. Chroniclers noted their interest in architecture, sacred geometry, and the construction of cathedrals whose soaring designs still defy imagination. Some suggested they had learned secrets in the East, wisdom from Muslim scholars, or perhaps even contact with older, stranger traditions that predated Christianity. Could it be that these hidden teachings were passed not only within the order, but also quietly into the families and bloodlines connected to them? Imagine a noble house in France, bound by marriage to Templar knights. Their sons learn not only the arts of war, but the whispered law of the temple. Knowledge of finance, strategy, and perhaps even esoteric traditions guarded since Jerusalem. These families prosper generation after generation, while others fade into obscurity, coincidence, or the subtle hand of a legacy too dangerous to speak openly. The Church itself seemed uneasy with the Templars' growing reach, yet popes continued to shield them, granting privileges that placed them beyond the grasp of secular rulers. Why? Perhaps because the order served a greater purpose, guarding relics, documents, or knowledge the Church dared not reveal. Some whispered that the Templars had secured the Holy Grail not as a cup of gold, but as a lineage, a bloodline tied to Christ himself. If such a claim were true, it would explain the desperate need to protect and conceal it. Of course, to the outside world, the Templars appeared loyal and humble, sworn to poverty and service. But look closer, their poverty was symbolic. In reality, they commanded riches rivaling kings. Their humility masked an arrogance that came from knowing they held secrets that could topple thrones. And their obedience, that was not to earthly kings, but to their own hidden purpose, whatever it may have been. The dynasties of Europe could not ignore them. Marriage alliances, donations of land, and blood ties wove a web so vast that untangling it is nearly impossible. To this day, genealogists find traces of families whose fortunes rose alongside the Templars and whose descendants would later appear in the courts of France, Scotland, and even the new kingdoms of the Americas. The red cross of the temple did not vanish. It was absorbed, transformed, carried silently through veins and alliances. But every ascent invites envy. Every fortune casts a shadow. Kings who borrowed too heavily from the Templars began to resent their creditors. Rulers who once leaned on the knights for support began to see them as rivals, and whispers of heresy grew louder. Fanned by those who coveted their wealth, the Templars had woven themselves into the bloodlines of Europe, but in doing so, they had also made themselves indispensable and dangerous. Their connections were so deep, their secrets so profound, that removing them would be no simple matter. To destroy the Templars was to risk tearing apart the very structure of Christendom itself. And yet that is exactly what would happen, because power invites not only envy, but betrayal. And the bloodlines tied to the temple would soon be tested in fire, exile, and death. The stage was set for the greatest downfall in medieval history, a downfall that, paradoxically, would ensure the survival of the Templar legacy in ways no king could foresee. But that is the next chapter of our story. It was the dawn of Friday, October 13th, 1307, a day that would forever stain the calendar with infamy. Across France, the king's soldiers moved with ruthless precision. Doors splintered, knights were dragged from their beds, commanderies were ransacked. By nightfall, hundreds of Templars lay shackled in dungeons, their white mantles stripped away, their red crosses torn and trampled into the dirt. This was no accident of fate. It was the carefully orchestrated strike of a king who hungered for their wealth and feared their power. Philip of France, remembered as Philip the Fair, was a monarch drowning in debt. Wars had drained his treasury, and his borrowing from the Templars had chained him to them. Yet the more he depended on their loans, the more he resented their independence. The Templars, after all, bowed to no king. Their allegiance was to the Pope alone. Their estates, their castles, their immense treasure, none of it was Philip's to touch, unless, of course, he could brand them as heretics. And so the whispers became accusations. In secret documents prepared months in advance, the king painted the order as monstrous. Men who spat on the cross during initiation, who denied Christ, who engaged in unholy rituals, who worshipped a strange idol with the head of a man or a beast known only as Baphomet. The accusations spread like fire, and with them came fear. Could it be true? Had the mighty defenders of Christendom betrayed their very faith? Or was this nothing more than a king's desperate lie, crafted to justify his theft? What followed was a nightmare. Under the darkness of the dungeons, Templars were tortured until their screams echoed through the stone, joints torn apart on the rack, feet roasted over flames, confessions beaten out of broken men who would say anything to end the agony. Yes, we spat on the cross. Yes, we denied Christ. Yes, we worshipped a head. The words were written down, signed with trembling hands, and held aloft as proof of guilt. But not all confessed, and not all who confessed remained silent forever. Many, once freed from torture, recanted, declaring their innocence before God. Yet the damage was done. The trials dragged on for years, a slow unravelling of an order that had once terrified armies. Pope Clement V, pressured by Philip, reluctantly dissolved the Templars in 1312. Their lands were seized, their brothers scattered, their name blackened. And then came the final act on March 18th, 1314. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Temple, was led to a pyre on the Aile de la Cité in Paris. Beside him stood Geoffrey de Charny, preceptor of Normandy. Before the flames were lit, de Molay spoke words that froze the crowd in silence. He proclaimed the innocence of the Templars and condemned King Philip and Pope Clement, summoning them to meet him before God within a year. The fire roared. The Grand Master was consumed by the flames, but his curse lingered in the smoke, and within a year both Philip IV and Clement V were dead. Coincidence, or the hand of fate? To the people of France it was justice. To the Templar sympathizers it was proof that their Grand Master had spoken truth with his dying breath. Yet this was not the end. For though the order had been broken, the bloodlines tied to it endured. Across Europe, not all rulers obeyed Philip's command. In Portugal, King Dinis refused to betray the knights who had fought so valiantly in the Reconquista. Instead, he rebranded them as the Order of Christ. Their lands remained intact, their members protected, their legacy reborn under a new name. It was this very order, a century later, that would guide the Portuguese explorers who opened the Age of Discovery, an expansion that reshaped the world. In Scotland, too, the Templars may have found refuge. At the time, Scotland was under excommunication for defying papal authority, and King Robert the Bruce had little reason to enforce the Pope's decree. Legend whispers that Templars fought beside him at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. their sudden cavalry charge turning the tide against the English. Whether true or not, the tale reinforced the belief that the Templars had survived in secret, their red cross hidden beneath new banners. Meanwhile, noble families connected to the order continued to prosper. Marriages, inheritances, and alliances ensured that Templar blood flowed quietly through European veins. Their properties, officially transferred to the Hospitallers, often found their way back into the hands of sympathetic lords, men whose sons or cousins had once worn the white mantle. And then there were the documents, the treasures, the supposed relics. Some say the Templars spirited them away before the arrests, hiding them in secret vaults, in remote fortresses, or even aboard ships that vanished into the Atlantic. Stories abound of Templar fleets sailing from La Rochelle, disappearing without a trace. Did they carry gold, or something far more dangerous, the proof of a bloodline that would shake Christianity to its core? In later centuries, this possibility would feed endless speculation. If the Templars had indeed safeguarded relics tied to Christ, then perhaps their alliances with noble houses were not merely political. Perhaps they were custodians of something living, a lineage that survived persecution by becoming one with the families of Europe. Freemasons would later claim descent from the temple, cloaking themselves in symbols of Solomon's wisdom and Templar secrecy. Rosicrucians and other mystical orders whispered of hidden teachings preserved through the centuries. And in France, where the order had been destroyed, rumours persisted that its bloodlines lived on. Quiet, patient, waiting for a time when the Red Cross might rise again, the fall of the Templars was brutal, swift, and seemingly final. Yet it was not an erasure. It was a transformation. The order's public face was burned away, but its spirit, its secrets, and perhaps even its bloodlines endured in shadows, for the true power of the Templars was never only in their castles, their gold, or their armies. It was in the connections they forged, the alliances with dynasties, the marriages into noble houses, the networks that transcended borders. A king could destroy an order, but no king could destroy blood itself. And so the Red Cross did not vanish. It went underground, hidden in new orders, preserved in family trees, whispered in legend. The Templars were gone, but they were also everywhere. The flames of 1314 may have reduced their Grand Master to ash, but those flames only cast new shadows, shadows where the hidden legacy of the temple would continue to grow. But survival in secret came at a cost. For when something powerful is forced underground, it often mutates, taking on new forms, new purposes. And the centuries that followed would see the Templar legacy entwine with conspiracies of dynasties, revolutions, and secret societies that still provoke unease today. The fall of the Templars was not their end, it was their rebirth. And that rebirth would echo through the bloodlines of Europe and beyond. The flames that consumed Jacques de Molay in 1314 were meant to erase the Knights Templar from history, yet fire has a way of spreading. Though their castles had been seized, their order dissolved, and their leaders executed, whispers of their survival grew louder with each passing century. The Templars had vanished from the stage of kings and popes, but in their absence, symbols began to rise. Across Europe, red crosses carved into stonework, strange markings hidden in cathedrals, and geometric patterns woven into architecture hinted that the order's knowledge had not been extinguished. The soaring Gothic cathedrals, with their dizzying heights and mystical designs, was said by some to embody sacred geometry, knowledge preserved by the Templars and passed into the hands of master builders. These builders, masons by trade, would in time organize themselves into guilds, and from those guilds would emerge one of history's most enigmatic societies, the Freemasons. The Freemasons claimed heritage not from Jerusalem's knights, but from Jerusalem's temple itself, the wisdom of Solomon, the sacred craft of building, yet their ritual symbols and secrecy bore uncanny resemblances to the vanished Templars. The square and compass echoed the Templars' fascination with geometry. The initiation rites, whispered behind closed doors, recalled the charges once levelled against the knights. And in lodges across Europe, noblemen gathered not only to discuss philosophy, but to preserve lineages of influence. Could it be coincidence? Or had the bloodlines of the temple found a new vessel in which to preserve themselves? The evidence is tantalizing. In Scotland, where Robert the Bruce had defied Rome and allegedly sheltered fugitive Templars, the earliest Masonic traditions took root. The Scottish Rite, still central to Freemasonry today, carried with it symbols that many argue trace back to the Red Cross of the Temple. Was this the hidden refuge of the order, reborn not as warriors, but as architects of secret knowledge? Meanwhile, in Portugal, the transformation was less subtle. The Order of Christ, born from the ashes of the temple, thrived openly under royal patronage. Its Grand Masters included Prince Henry the Navigator, whose fleets opened the seas and launched the Age of Discovery. The Red Cross on the sails of Portuguese caravels, those ships that rounded Africa and reached the New World, was none other than the cross of the temple reborn. Here we see the bloodline legacy in motion. Families tied to the order now extended their reach across oceans, claiming lands, wealth and influence on a scale unimaginable in the Middle Ages. The spirit of the temple had not only survived, it had expanded to a global stage. And then there is France, where the Templars had been most brutally suppressed. Yet even here their shadow lingered. Secret societies emerged, weaving legends of hidden Templar treasure, of documents smuggled out of Paris, of a bloodline so sacred it had to remain hidden. By the Renaissance, these stories intertwined with new currents of mysticism, alchemy, Rosicrucianism, and Kabbalistic traditions that whispered of hidden truths behind the surface of religion. To some these were harmless myths, the fantasies of dreamers. But to others they were proof that the Templar bloodlines had gone underground, guiding events from the shadows. Consider the French royal houses. Rumors swirled that certain dynasties held ties to the temple, that marriages and alliances had preserved their legacy within the highest ranks of nobility. The Bourbon kings, the Valois, and others carried with them genealogies that some conspiracy-minded historians trace back to families entwined with the Templar order. If true, then the throne of France itself was stained with Templar blood. But power cannot remain hidden forever. As Europe hurtled toward the modern age, revolutions erupted. The American Revolution, the French Revolution, both were stirred by men linked to Freemasonry, bearing symbols echoing the temple. The all-seeing eye, the unfinished pyramid, the obsession with liberty, equality, and brotherhood, were these ideals born solely of Enlightenment reason? Or were they fragments of a much older inheritance, carried through secret lodges whose founders whispered the name of the temple in shadows? The French Revolution, in particular, bore strange echoes. The monarchy that had betrayed the Templar centuries earlier was now overthrown, its king executed before the eyes of the people. To some, this was more than political. It was karmic, the vengeance of a legacy that had waited patiently for its reckoning. And across the ocean, the founding fathers of the United States, many of them Freemasons, wove symbols into the very fabric of their new nation. The dollar bill bore imagery that critics pointed to as esoteric. The capital's architecture echoed temples of old. Was America, in some strange way, an extension of the Templar dream, a new Jerusalem built not of stone, but of ideals preserved across centuries? But let us not forget bloodlines matter as much as symbols. Noble families across Europe continued to trace their descent with pride. The Sinclair family of Scotland, long associated with Rosslyn Chapel, became central to Templar lore. Roslin itself, with its intricate carvings and hidden symbols, was said to conceal Templar secrets, and perhaps even relics. Some even whispered that the Sinclairs had carried the Grail to Scotland, preserving it in their lineage. The Medici of Florence, patrons of the Renaissance, also bore connections to older noble houses entwined with the temple. Their rise to power through banking mirrored the Templars' own financial empire. Were they inheritors of a hidden tradition, carrying forward the marriage of money, art, and influence that the temple had pioneered, whether by blood, by symbol, or by secret oath? The Templar legacy seeped into the fabric of Europe's rebirth. They were no longer knights charging into battle, but perhaps they had never truly been just knights. Perhaps their true purpose was always to endure, to transform, to guide the course of history from beneath the surface. The Renaissance and the Enlightenment opened the world to science exploration and revolution. Yet beneath the rational light of reason, shadows moved, shadows cast by a cross once burned in fire, now hidden in plain sight. And always the question lingers, were these continuities mere coincidence, the natural survival of ideas and symbols? Or were they the deliberate work of bloodlines that carried the Templar legacy forward, protecting secrets too dangerous to reveal? The red cross was gone from the battlefield, but it was not gone from history. It had simply changed shape into ships that sailed the oceans, into lodges that swore secret oaths, into dynasties that shaped kingdoms, into revolutions that remade nations. The Templars had fallen, but their rebirth had already begun. And in that rebirth, the seeds were sown for the modern world. But what then of today? If the Templar bloodlines endured into revolutions and dynasties, could they still be with us now? Are the whispers of their survival in elite families, secret societies, and global institutions merely fantasies or glimpses of a truth that refuses to die? The answer lies in the final chapter. The story of the Templars is often told as one of rise and fall, of glorious ascension to wealth and power, followed by a violent purge that left them broken, scattered, and erased. But history, as we've uncovered, rarely ends so neatly. Behind the smoke of executions and the ink of papal decrees lies another story. A story of survival, a story of transformation, a story of bloodlines and legacies that endured long after the last Templar fortress crumbled. For centuries, whispers have claimed that the Order's essence was never truly extinguished. Instead, it seeped into the cracks of Europe, flowing into noble families, secret societies, and religious currents that carried their influence forward, quietly shaping the world in unseen ways. Some say the Templars never died, they merely changed their robes. But where exactly do we see these shadows today? Consider the dynasties of Europe, families like the Stuarts of Scotland, the Bourbons of France, and even branches of the Habsburg line have long been in rumour to carry blood ties to Templar knights. These whispers are not idle gossip. In some cases, charters, land grants, and marriages link noble houses directly to former Templar estates. Through these unions, bloodlines became vessels for wealth and influence once owned by the Order. But what's more intriguing is the recurring pattern. Generations later, these families often found themselves tied to major historical turning points. The Reformation, the Enlightenment, even the revolutions that reshaped the modern West. Was this coincidence or a hidden hand guiding events from behind velvet curtains? As time passed, new societies arose, Freemasons, Rosicrucians, and other secret brotherhoods. Their rituals bore uncanny resemblance to Templar practices. Their symbols echoed the Red Cross, the Twin Pillars, the hidden keys of esoteric knowledge. Even their architecture, with precise geometry and sacred design, seemed to carry the DNA of Templar engineering. Could these societies have been the next evolution of the Order? Not Templars in name, but in essence a hidden continuation of their mission. Historians debate this fiercely, yet the overlaps are undeniable. The Masonic temple, for example, resonates with Templar ideals of sacred geometry, secrecy, and sworn brotherhood. If the Templars did not survive as knights with swords, perhaps they survived as visionaries with compasses, trading armor for allegory, and crusades for philosophy. But bloodlines and societies are not the only threads of survival. There are also the treasures, those whispered relics that still ignite curiosity, the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant. Sacred texts said to reveal truths hidden from the Church. Legends insist these were spirited away in the chaos of the arrests. Some believe they were carried to Scotland. Others claim Portugal hid them in plain sight. And some insist they crossed the Atlantic, becoming the seeds of mystery in the New World. If true, then the legacy of the Templars is not only in families or lodges, it is in the artifacts that remain hidden, waiting for rediscovery, and perhaps in the knowledge those artifacts contain. The modern stage, but what of today? Where do the Templar shadows fall in our modern world? Some point to the continued power of banking dynasties, Rothschilds, Rockefellers, and others. Families often accused, fairly or not, of shaping global finance in ways eerily reminiscent of the Templar role as medieval bankers. Others see their influence in international organizations, where secrecy, ritual, and hierarchy echo Templar traditions. From elite fraternities to global councils, the whispers continue. The knights never died, they adapted. Even in popular culture, the fascination endures. Novels, films, and television have immortalized them, weaving fact and fiction until the two are indistinguishable. The very act of telling their story keeps their influence alive, as if the Templars themselves ensured their memory would forever haunt our imagination. So we return to the central mystery. Did the Templar bloodlines survive? Were they noble families guarding a secret legacy? Were they brotherhoods sworn to carry a hidden torch? Or were they simply myths sustained by the human need to believe in something greater than ourselves, something eternal? Perhaps the truth lies in all of these answers at once. For even if the physical knights were destroyed, the idea of the Templar, the dream of a sacred order with power beyond kings and popes, could never be killed. Ideas, after all, are immortal. As the night deepens and our story draws to its end, one truth becomes clear: the Templars remain with us, not as they once were, but as shadows cast across time. Their bloodlines, whether literal or symbolic, run through the veins of history, shaping events in ways we may never fully uncover. Their secrets, whether buried in castles, guarded in archives, or passed in whispered oaths, continue to ignite curiosity. Their symbols endure on cathedrals, in lodges, and even in the architecture of cities we walk through daily unnoticed. And so the legacy of the Templars is not about their death, it is about their transformation, a transformation that ensures their power, see, whether real or imagined, never truly fades. As you close your eyes tonight, ask yourself, who truly controls the course of history? Are we guided by chance, by visible leaders, or by hidden forces that reach across centuries? The Templar bloodlines remain a mystery, a hidden legacy of power, and perhaps their story is not finished yet.